So now let's move on to some practice questions to review everything that we've talked about so far. So Bob and Susan design a study to investigate happiness across the lifespan. They decide to go to a mall and ask people of a variety of ages if they are happy or unhappy. What is the most serious flaw of this design? Feel free to pause the video here to give your answer. So the most serious flaw of this design is D. They have not defined happiness or how it will be measured, right? So they're just going to go to the mall and ask people, "Are you happy? Are you unhappy?" That might differ greatly from one person to another. Someone who's retired and living and just not really doing much, but just living at home might have a very different definition of happiness than someone who's a college student, for example. Right. So it's important in this situation for them to provide an operational definition for happiness in their study. Next question. Bob and Susan design a study investigating happiness across the lifespan. They decide to go to the mall and have 50 older adults, ages 65 and older, and 50 young adults, ages 18 to 35, fill out a questionnaire to measure their degree of happiness, where higher scores indicate greater happiness. Their hypothesis is that older people are happier than younger people. What type of research design is this? Feel free to pause the video here. So the answer to this one would be B, a quasi-experimental design, not an experimental design, because they cannot randomly assign people to be in the older group or the younger group. If they go to the mall and just pick people, people are automatically going to be either in one group or the other, and they have no control over who gets into which group. So that would likely be a quasi-experimental design. It wouldn't be a longitudinal design because they're not necessarily following people up over time, and is stated as having groups, so it isn't a correlational design. Here's the next question. Bob and Susan design a study investigating happiness across the lifespan. They decide to go to the mall and have 50 older adults and 50 young adults fill out a questionnaire to measure their degree of happiness, where, once again, higher scores indicate greater happiness. Their hypothesis is that older people are happier than younger people. In this scenario, what is the dependent variable and which one is the independent variable? Feel free to pause the video here and give your answer. So in this scenario, I find it useful to start by thinking about the independent variable. What is it that the researchers have control over? They don't have control over what the results of the study will be, but they do have control over some aspect of the manipulation. So what they do have some control over, or I shouldn't say that. In this scenario, if this is a quasi-experimental study, they don't have full control over it. But what is different, what they're measuring that is different between the two groups, is the age group. So the age group is the independent variable. That's the thing that is different between the individuals in both groups in the study. It's their age group, with two levels: older adults and younger adults. That's the independent variable. And then the dependent variable would be what they are measuring. What is the outcome measure in this study? And that is their measure of they're measuring their degree of happiness. So more specifically, the most correct answer would be their scores on the questionnaire are the dependent variable, and that helps them inform and helps them think about and make inferences about their degree of happiness. But degree of happiness is the higher level construct here in this scenario. More specifically, the dependent variable is the scores on the questionnaire. Here's the next question. So once again, Bob and Susan are designing a study to investigate happiness. They go to the mall and have this time People of variety of ages fill out a questionnaire to measure their degree of happiness, where higher scores indicate greater happiness. Their hypothesis is that there will be a positive relationship between age and happiness, that people tend to get happier as they get older. What type of research design is this? So this is very clearly a correlational design because they have people of a variety of ages across the spectrum fill out the questionnaire, and their primary hypothesis is talking about a relationship. So remember, whenever you hear the word correlation, think of the word relationship between two or more variables. And lastly, the same prompt as before, they decide to go to the mall and have people of a variety of ages fill out a questionnaire to measure their degree of happiness. And Bob and Susan's hypothesis is that people tend to get happier as they get older. And they find that the correlation between scores on the questionnaire and the participants' ages is a Pearson's correlation coefficient, an R of negative 0.35, negative 0.35. What does that result mean for their hypothesis? So let's think this one through. So the relationship between age and the scores on the questionnaire, which represent their degree of happiness, is 0.35, negative 0.35. So let's divide that in two. First, let's deal with the actual magnitude of the correlation, and then the sign, positive or minus, of the correlation. So the magnitude of the correlation is 0.35. So it's kind of on the we would call that a medium strength correlation or a moderate correlation. It's kind of closer to zero than to one. And also has a negative sign, so it's an inverse correlation. So what that means is that as scores on the questionnaire go up, age goes down. Or another way of saying it is, as people get older, their scores on the questionnaire go down, that they have an inverse relationship. And so, looking back to Bob and Susan's hypothesis, their hypothesis was that people tend to get happier as they get older. So as age increases, happiness also increases. So this result would mean that their hypothesis was not supported. And there's two options here, C and D, that say the hypothesis was not supported. Let's be very specific. The hypothesis was not supported, not because the correlation was moderate or weak, but because the opposite relationship was found. What was described in this correlation coefficient is that as age increases, happiness decreases. So their hypothesis was not supported. So for example, this is a rough representation of what a correlation of negative 0.35 might look like. You see here on the y-axis that uh, as happiness goes down, oops, that as happiness goes, here we go, that as happiness goes down, age increases. And it probably makes more sense to say that the other way. As age increases, happiness goes down. So that people who are on the younger age of the spectrum over here, let's say people who are kids, age 12, versus individuals who are older, let's say age 80. As age increases, happiness goes down. These individuals are not as happy as these individuals over here. So that brings us to the end of this lecture on research, psychological research and the scientific method. The next chapter will focus on the application of scientific research, particularly in biopsychology.